Michael Brown here. Today we're going to explore the looking glass portrait. You may have seen my prior video where I did an unboxing of this device, and I have the looking glass portrait hooked up to my computer, and I want to demonstrate it for you and show you what some of the software is capable of. It's a very interesting device. I'm very happy with it. I'm pleased with its performance. It has some surprising aspects that I didn't realize. The device itself is basically a flat panel display that has a lenticular screen bonded to it. It's a QXGA resolution, which is 2048 by 1536. The lenticular sheet that's on there, I thought I heard a few months ago it was about 50 LPI, somewhere in that neighborhood. The surprising thing to me was that the device is basically a video player. Even when you import 3D still image into it, the software, their HoloPlay software, actually makes a 10-second, 300-frame video of that for playback on the device. It has some really interesting, I guess, quirky aspects, not performance-wise, but how they pull off the technology. It's really pretty neat. I've opened up one of their video files from the device. I'll show that to you in a bit, and you can see some of the things that I've discovered. The device itself has two cables when you attach it to a computer, an HDMI cable and a USB-C cable. The iMac that I use doesn't have HDMI output, so I actually had to buy a little accessory. This is an Apple adapter that goes from USB-C to HDMI, as well as some other ports. So I basically have the USB-C from the computer to the looking glass, and then I have the HDMI going from the adapter to the looking glass portrait. The front of the device has a white LED illuminated, I'm assuming it's LED illuminated, frame in front of it. I'm not a huge fan of that light, but it can be dimmed and it also can be turned off. My preference is actually to turn it off. When you look at it, the unit by itself appears to be about a 30 millimeter thick frame. There are some additional electronics behind it that increase the depth a little bit, but the frame part, where you look at the picture, it appears to be about 30 millimeters deep. 18 millimeters into it, there's actually the display, and so there's this illusion that you're looking into this thick, 1+ inch box, but the screen's sort of midway in that box. So part of the image appears off the screen, part recedes behind it. It's a very convincing illusion. I took a close-up of the screen with a microscope. It was actually kind of interesting. So here you can see the screen itself, and you can look at the bands that are off at an angle. I forgot the measurement, somewhere between 7 and 10 degrees, as I recall. And then I put a white box around there, basically representing the width of a lenticule, and you can see the color arrangement in there. They're doing something different. The RGB pixels aren't really arranged in a grid. There's sort of this sine wave pattern going through it, and I'm not sure what that's all about, but some of us have been talking about the looking glass portrait. I know Giovanni Remigi and I, on an earlier conversation, he was saying they must be doing something special. They must be doing something special because it's performing better than I should. And I think maybe this sine wave of the color triads might be part of what they're doing special. Now you can see the lenticular pattern is off at an angle. That's typically done to reduce moire, so that would be expected. This kind of color pattern is unexpected. If I close that, when you get your images into the looking glass, this is an interlaced file. It's basically a screen grab. The looking glass portrait appears as a second monitor on your unit, and you can actually do a screen grab of the monitor and see what the file is all about. So this particular one, 2048 pixels high, 1536 pixels wide. Let's see if I can zoom in on that a little bit here. Okay, so again, you can see that diagonal pattern with the lenticular lenticules, and then here you can see, by zooming in, you can see how it's all interlaced. Now, it was very interesting to me when I decided to import files. One of the file types it can take is what they call a quilt. If I call up a quilt here, all right, this is one I made. This is 100 pictures. So I had my camera on a slider. This was actually done a few years ago. I had a Sony FS700 high-speed video camera, and I had it on, and now that I say that, it wasn't a slider, it was an arcing orbital dolly. And the arc was basically centered in on the model. I ran it at 240 frames a second. I took a subset of that, which you're seeing here, which is 100 individual frames. Now the way this quilt works is the bottom left frame is frame number 1, and then they count upwards until you get to the top right corner, and in that case that would be frame 100. Now you don't need 100 frames. They actually have a recommendation, if I look at my notes here. Yes, so they suggest as a good starting point using 48 frames and doing 8 columns vertically by 6 rows horizontally. The outer dimension of that would be 3360 by 3360 pixels, meaning each individual frame is 420 pixels wide by 560 pixels tall. Now you hear a number like that, and it's like, wow, that is sub 1 megapixel per frame. That is tiny. Can that possibly have the resolution? Well, you have to remember in autostereoscopic imagery like lenticular prints, frames are average. So when you look at a print, or in this case when we look at the looking glass, you'd like to say the left eye is seeing one frame from the series and the right eye is seeing another frame from the series, but that's not really true. The left eye is seeing a cluster of frames and the right eye is seeing a different cluster of frames. So for example, let's say we have this 48 picture sequence. One eye is looking at maybe 3 or 4 frames and the other eye is seeing a different set of 3 or 4 frames offset horizontally. And that frame averaging is what allows you to take lower resolution files and have them appear to be higher resolution. That works with lenticular prints and that works with the looking glass as well. So I've taken and made a variety of quilts and imports using their recipe, and it seems to work just fine. So it was a surprise though. The other surprise is if we open up a file from that, like the looking glass, if I double click its icon on the desktop, here's a list of all the files that are currently stored on my unit, and if you can read this closely, they all have the .mp4 extension, so they're videos. Now I can take one of those in Photoshop. We'll just go File, Import, Video Frames to Layers, and I'll grab one of those files. Sure I will. Come on, Photoshop, catch up. So the looking glass portrait came with some sample files. One of them, again, Giovanni Remigi, he had, I think, a couple on there, but one of it is his wasps. So let's find that. Here's my looking glass. And down below, I see Wasp by Giovanni, and this says it's a 7 by 13 frame arrangement. So that was the quilt he used. So that would be what, 70, 21, 91 frames if I did my arithmetic correctly. Let's open that up. So now the first thing you see on this is it's stretched out. It's not the aspect ratio of the screen. In fact, it's twice as wide as what you would expect. Oops. Not sure why this other file popped up, but we'll get to that later. All right, so here's our file. Now if we go image to the image size, this says it's 2048 by 3072 pixels. Now that 2048 number, you might remember earlier, that's one of the dimensions of the panel. The other dimension of the panel is actually 1536. So if we took this file and took the width of it and reduced it by 50%, it would match the aspect ratio of the looking glass. Another way to see that without actually resizing the entire file. Let's go to our pixel aspect ratio. We'll put in 0.5. Okay. And now that matches the aspect ratio of the looking glass. So they basically have a file that's twice as wide as it should be, and then they're, you know, doing their magic to display it on the looking glass. So I thought that was very interesting. So what you end up with, this file of the WASP in the MP4 format is actually a 300 frame video. So I'm guessing if you play that back at 30 frames a second, that would be 10 seconds. So I'm thinking when you do the slideshow function on the device, it's basically playing a video, and then after 10 seconds going to the next one. I have to concede I haven't timed it, but that's my impression of what's going on there. So super interesting device. Just really, really happy with it so far. Now, to get your pictures into Looking Glass, you use their software, which is called HoloPlay Studio, and I'll launch that. Now, what you're seeing on mine will look a little different than when you first launch it, because I've already been playing around and I have different files in here. In fact, there on the Looking Glass screen is Mark Diamond, a lenticular printmaker and a holographer from Miami. When I was first testing this out, I grabbed some of my iPhone portrait mode photos, and this was one of them that I had played with. So if you look to the right of this screen, let's see if I can make that bigger. There are choices for adding your hologram. That's what Looking Glass calls these autostereoscopic views, holograms. They use the term very loosely. There's basically two broad categories, which are 2D plus depth, grayscale depth map conversions, and then there are multi-frame sequences. So the first thing that's listed here is the iPhone portrait photo. The iPhone cameras, the new ones, have the ability to take a portrait mode picture, and that doesn't mean just holding your phone in portrait orientation. It means that when you take the picture in portrait mode, it captures your image and it captures a grayscale depth map. And that's all kind of hidden from the user, but you can open up one of these iPhone pictures and actually display it on the Looking Glass in 3D. So the first thing you have to do is export it from your phone. What I basically did is AirDrop. AirDrop is Apple's wireless way of going from your phone to the computer. And so I airdropped a few images. I'll go to the file browser and open up one of those. So let's see, iPhone portrait mode. Let's take this Mickey Mouse one. So here it is on the Looking Glass. I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. These are the white lines I was describing. I just want to turn those off. So there's a little button here to dim those, and then off completely. I prefer not having those on. Apologize for the reflection of me, but here you can get that simulation, since the camera I'm videotaping with this is a 2D camera, not 3D. But the software has two different controls, sliders. One is called depthiness and the other is focus. Now, depthiness increases or decreases the z-axis volume. Maybe I should do it this way. And focus sets the 0 point. So you can imagine on the autostereoscopic picture, there's the plane where the sensor is, and not the sensor, the display, and then part of the image can come forward to that, and part can recede behind it. So you have this volume, and the focus basically allows you to move that plane forward or back. So as one example, when I photograph people in 3D, I like to have the eyes at that plane, because the plane, that 0 point, is the sharpest. It has the least depth, it's the sharpest. And then things that protrude forward from that plane, the farther they go, the softer they get, and the same with the farther back they go, the softer they get. I have to admit, though, the Looking Glass has a pretty good rendering of volume. Rarely do I see things that are dramatically out of focus. So using this slider with the depthness, I can, reduce the depth from that photo, and I can also change the focus. Now, you're not really going to see that on this particular 2D view. It's something you need to have, use your two eyes with a binocular stereoscopic vision to see that. So that's what we do. So now that I have Mickey on there, all I have to do is keep that in my list. It's the very bottom one here. If I decided I didn't want it, hidden little control here, it took me a while to discover. You have to hold down the Option key, and then there's the ability to delete that from your playlist. So I will do that. And then it disappears. So let's go back to Add Hologram. Let's look at something related to that, which is RGB-D, red, green, blue, a color image, plus D, a depth map. So for example, let's open up a couple of those in Photoshop. So this one I'm showing here is actually a historic picture my wife found of English author G.K. Chesterton and his wife and their dog, and she wanted me to make a 3D picture of that. And so I hired Zaza, and he actually made a hand-drawn depth map for me, which is what you see on the right. So that's this image. And here's one I was just doing a test. I think this depth map was actually made in tri-axis stereo tracer. So I had used the Fuji W3 camera, well, W1 camera at this point, and took a stereo pair, and I imported that stereo pair into tri-axis stereo tracer, and it was able to generate this depth map. So using the image and the depth map, we can create a 3D picture on the looking glass portrait. So let's do that. So I'll come here to Import File, and then I will pull down here to my desktop, and I will find my folder RGB plus D. So here's the dog. Let's open that. And so now you can see the dog on the screen here in all its 3D glory. So once again, you have these sliders for depthiness and focus if you want to make any of those adjustments. This drop down here, depth position, right, left, bottom, top, that's where you're storing the depth map relative to the image. So basically I had a single JPEG file, and I had my image on the left, I had my depth map on the right, so this setting would be right, and that's all that is about. So let's now go on to some more advanced things. So for multi-frame imagery, which sometimes we refer to as light field imagery, or in the case of the looking glass portrait and the way I capture image, it's not a true light field with rays shooting off in all direction. What we're doing is we're moving the camera horizontally, so it's basically HPO, or horizontal parallax only, but it's a HPO light field. So you can move the camera on a slider, and I know Looking Glass promotes that. I think one of their kits comes with a slider, probably about 1 meter or so, and then you can just take and make a video moving across the slider. I like using a slider. I also like using an orbital dolly that lets me arc around the subject. The key with portraiture is you do your slider or you do your arcing of the camera, but then you have to line up all the images with one another. So typically what I'll do is I'll use a program like Adobe After Effects. It has the ability to do tracking of frames, and so I'll put a little marquee around the subject's eye, and I'll just have it track that eye from frame to frame to frame, and then it will auto align them. So that's a nice little shortcut when you have a fixed reference point. So with that in mind, we'll go to this quilt photo and video. Now I haven't played with making autostereoscopic dimensional videos. I know that's something that's coming in the future, but right now I've only worked with still. So I'm going to import my file. We'll go back to the desktop. It will be the same file we looked at before. So I open this up, and on screen it looks crazy, and that's because I haven't told it the properties yet. You can see there's an input box here for columns and rows. So this particular quilt, I had 10 columns and I had 10 rows, and now that I input those values, it looks great. So here we are on screen. So this is terrific. I mean, this has the true look around effect. I mean, just looks fantastic on the device. if I say so myself. All right, now let's go to the next step. So the quilt is nice because you can just send that quilt off to someone and they can import it onto their looking glass, and then see it as well. And the quilt already has, all the, let's say, depth and 0 point and everything encoded into it. I basically took a set of frames that were already lined up, corrected, cropped, and I made those into the quilt. When you do the light field photo set, you have an additional bit of flexibility. So let's open up a photo set. And we'll go back to desktop. The one I want to use is, this Just Gone Stairs is a good one. But let's look at Atlanta. All right, so here's Alana, and she's looking really good. Once again, this is a frame series. This is 60 pictures, so it's not 100. But you have the focus control here in the software, and by moving that back, you're resetting that 0 point. So again, I could bring this, here. I just put her really far back, but to me, she's too far back. I would like that hand to basically come up to the front edge of the frame, and I'd like her eyes to be as close to the 0 point so she looks a little sharper. So by just clicking that around, and that just did it right there, that one click, putting that a little bit to the left, now it's just perfectly aligned. So it's great. I mean, it looks so 3D, so terrific. They really did a great job with this device. Let's see if we can do one more, because I do have a favorite image here. I forgot, Jessica. I think it's, I don't know which one. So I found one limitation with the looking glass software is you have to have your frames in the correct order. If they're backwards, they appear pseudoscopic. So I actually took this frame series and I rendered the frames from 1 to 48, and then I made another set from 48 to 1 because I wasn't sure which one would be right. But this one I picked is right. So and I'm getting a little bit of reflection, and I apologize about that. I have sun coming in from the window and it's illuminating me. But this is just so wonderful looking in this box. The back wall looks like it's probably, another 2 or 3 inches behind the device, and it's great. It's a great set. So that's really my favorite type of autostereoscopic photography. I know a lot of people like, 2D plus depth, or they take a stereo pair and make a depth map and then do 2D plus depth, and that's okay, but in my mind, you always get kind of an embossed look with that unless you really go through the time and divide your image up into layers and put a depth map with each layer. I find it so easy just to take the camera and put it on a slide or dolly and capture a frame series, and that's the way I love to work with my lenticular prints, and the frame series look great on the looking glass. All right, with that in mind, what are my conclusions about this device? I bought it the first day of the Kickstarter, and I think I paid $199 for it, and I think the price has gone up since then. It's definitely worth what I paid for it. I did have to buy the Apple adapter, and that was $70. So if your computer doesn't have a if your computer doesn't have a HDMI output, you may have to buy an adapter as well. To get this set up, go to the Looking Glass site, and they have all sorts of tutorial orientation videos all about it. It was very easy to set up following their instructions. In my particular case, I was on an older Mac operating system, and I had to update to a newer Mac operating system to use their software. I was on Mojave, and the latest Mac one, which is 2 generations newer, is Big Sur. So I did have to use Big Sur to get it to work. So image quality is, I think, really good. It does have the screen door effect, but you quickly forget about that. It's neat because you can preload images into it to show people, although one limitation of that is you have to be plugged in. So this morning I want to show some things to my wife, and we were at the kitchen table, and I'm like, well, we got to go over to the kitchen counter so I can plug this in and show it to you. I did notice one of the sample files that came with it was a video, and I could tell this woman was saying something, but there's no speaker in the device. So there is a headphone output. I had to plug in earbuds in order to listen to it. So I think there have been some compromises, but that's probably how they get the price, so low. So I'm dazzled by the thing. And it surprises me how it works. I still don't fully understand all what's going on with, the sine wave RGB pattern and things like that, and why the file, has to be twice as wide in aspect ratio. So they're doing their magic, and I don't mind that magic. Now, the HoloPlay Studio, you just saw what it's capable of. This is software that I think is going to continue to grow. They have mentioned in the future of supporting MPO files and doing other things. I'm viewing the device purely from the perspective of a lenticular printmaker and a stereo photographer. I don't know much about dimensional video. I don't know much about taking 3D rendering software and using the looking glass as an external display to view such imagery. I don't know much about Unity, but what I do know is photography, and I'm quite happy with how it represents photography. So in a nutshell, that's my conclusion. I'm happy. I hope you enjoy this video. If you're still waiting to get your looking glass, I do recommend you go to their site and view the tutorials to get a head start. And the other thing I should mention is they have a great Discord support channel, and I've learned a bunch of nuggets just from viewing that. One of the nuggets I learned was the recommended dimensions for the quilt. It would have taken me a while to figure that out on my own. So I hope you get your looking glass soon. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoy mine. With that, have a great day.